I'd like to start out by reading the preamble to AA. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution. Does not wish to engage in any controversy. Neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. And my name's Sandy Beach, and I'm an alcoholic, and I'd like to welcome everybody here this morning. And I'm just amazed at the number that's here, and I'm very pleased, because I think it shows a good interest in some of these principles that we're trying to discuss and get familiar with here in these Saturday morning deals. For those of you that may be new, you can sit back for the next 50 minutes or so, because nobody's going to be calling on you. You can go to sleep, do whatever you want. And then we'll take a break in the next hour while we'll come back and we'll try and get everybody to participate in some kind of a discussion meeting. So now you got the ground rules. You can figure out what you want to do with your time. What we're going to try and do is spend about 50 minutes this particular week on steps 7, 8, and 9. And I always like to just review briefly to get into the steps, because I know that it's impossible to start where everybody has been here the week before or the month before. And so, assuming that there are a few new people, let me just briefly bring us up to those steps. The reason that we've decided to try and emphasize these steps is the following. It's very possible for you as someone new in AA to come in and get the message about not drinking and get swept up with these meetings and all these charming people that you come in contact with, and you go to the meetings and you get what I remember, which was the come-back syndrome. I'd never had anybody tell me to come back. And, I really related to that. Here I come in there and they go, hey, we're glad you're here. Come back next week. And boy, I was back. When, and somebody patted me on the head and said, come back. And it was obvious that they liked me. And so I was not drinking and I was coming back. And the problem is, even if you've been down to the very bottom, you can get used to that after a couple of years. That can start wearing off. Somebody patting you on the forehead, and you almost think you deserve it. And it starts to wear a little thin if that's your whole AA program, just coming back and getting patted on the forehead. There's something inside that says there must be more than this. Everybody else in the program is talking about serenity and peace of mind, and all I'm doing is getting patted on the head. The program must not be working for me. And if the program isn't working for me, then I must be unique, which I knew 2 years ago when I first came in. As a matter of fact, that's what I told my sponsor. You don't understand. I'm different than you are. Now it proves that I'm different, because I've been coming around a couple of years, and it's not working. And therein lies the dilemma, what's not working. I'm not working. That's what's going on. Only I wasn't really informed too well. Somebody came up, I think, last week or the week before with the fact that the 12 steps are AA's best-kept secret. And, some people are around for years and suddenly go, well, why didn't you tell me? And it's almost, if I've ever seen anything that's up front, it's these steps. They're up on the wall at every meeting, all the literature and everything, but it's almost like there's some people to which they do not apply. There are those, this is what I used to think, there are those who need the steps, and then there's the rest of us. And who simply go to meetings and get patted on the head. If it's working, why fix it? Did you ever hear that one? So why should I get involved in that part of the program? So what we're trying to do here is to suggest that almost everyone is going to need the steps. There's some people pass away early in the program, and they obviously don't need them, but the majority, it turns out, end up probably having to take some of these steps and do a little work on themselves. AA is, if you're new, it's obviously composed of people, it's obviously composed of groups, and to be more specific, it's around 1 million or in excess of 1 million, I don't know exactly where we are now, 1 million people and maybe 28,000 groups in 90 to 100 countries, been translated into many languages. So this program is obviously working. It's been around for quite a few years and has shown remarkable growth just in the last 10 years, really expanded. The one thing that all of the groups have in common are the 12 steps, are the principles that underlie the way of life that their members are attempting to lead. And it is the attempt to come in contact with these principles and make them a part of their daily lives that is what everyone has in common in AA. The groups may start at 7 in the morning, at 10 at night, at noon. They may go an hour and a half, an hour, 45 minutes, 2 hours, maybe 3 speakers. They may not close with the Lord's Prayer. They may start by reading several pages. There's all these little differences, but then there's the one thing in common, and that is these 12 steps. And that's good because principles never let us down. Those are the enduring qualities, our principles. People can let us down. You know, your sponsor can get drunk. A group can let us down. My first home group disbanded and was carried in the where and when for years as Humphrey Triangle disbanded. When I feel like an orphan, you look up your home group and it was disbanded, you know, so even a group can just run out of people that are going to it, and it's sitting there with an empty coffee pot, and you're not going to, it can, what I'm saying is, at the bottom line are these principles, and that's what causes us, through a process, I think, of learning and changing and self-examination, to transfer our dependence from people and things to values and spiritual qualities. And I think that is the essence of what the 12 steps attempt to have us do. Now, I suppose every human being is attempting to do this. Where the alcoholic have the edge is in the motivation to do it. They have been informed when they come into AA and by their doctors and families and a few friends that they had better try and do this. One of the big messages when you come into AA, in my opinion, is that you underestimated your alcoholism. You thought it was awful when it was really rotten. You thought things were bad and you come in and you find out you've only partly experienced how bad they can get. And there's a tremendous message in AA's first step, which says that we're powerless over alcohol and our lives have become unmanageable. And that basic message is that your alcoholism is fatal and it's going to kill you, and there's nothing that can stop it. You can exercise all your will, you can go see the best doctors in the world, but there is no way that that illness is not going to progress unless a miracle takes place. Unless we can come to make this transition and rely on something other than a human power. And this is derived from the experience of all the people who have gone before us. And many of us come in and say, I don't believe that. And we go back out. And then we're back about maybe 6 months later going, what'd you guys say again about what's going on in here? Well, it's a spiritual solution to this problem. Well, I don't believe that. And back out. And so what happens is there's a certain level of failure and pain that eventually gets our attention. And maybe we have a heart attack, or maybe we get down so low that we see death right around the corner. And under those conditions, our minds become open for the first time. I think this is one of the reasons alcoholics are able to come to grips with spiritualism is they sense the fact that they're going to die. And there's something about being in that position that opens the mind towards a higher power. When you say, well, I'm going to die, there's not much time left. I think I'll explore the spiritual side of what these other people have been talking about. And that opens the mind a little bit, and that seems to be what gets us moving down through the rest of these steps. Anytime I think my program is faltering, I like to go back to that first step. Whenever I'm questioning, why am I going into this inventory? It caused so much pain and so on down. The reason I'm doing is I want to stay alive. I don't want to go back into where I was, and this is how I'm going to prevent that return. In the weeks that have gone by, we discussed how we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, and we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to whatever this power was. For many of us, it was the AA group. And then we found that there were some painful endeavors to be done, and one of them was to take an examination of ourselves. And this is called our inventory step, or the fourth step in AA. Very painful, generally put off for years. It's generally talked about in the early months, around 3 months. Yes, sir, got to get on that inventory. Then on the third anniversary, very often you'll hear a speaker say, and now I'm going to get into my inventory. And it's amazing, but if we don't get into it, we build up a certain level of pain from not having done it, and eventually that pushes us into doing it, because we go, you know, I've been around the program a long time, and I'm miserable. And it may well be that we are now going to be pushed into doing some of these things, much as we were pushed into coming into AA. I don't know too many people who intellectualize their way into the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. They generally, a judge or a boss or a family or a doctor is pushing us in, and the same kind of pressure in many instances gets us moving on the step. Since alcoholics have the ability to rationalize to the nth power, there is no reason to believe that their fourth step is worth a hill of beans when they sit home alone and fill out a sheet of paper. If that were the end of it, I wonder what our sheets of paper would look like compared to what they look like, since we're going to have to, in the fifth step, show them to someone and hold them up to the examination of another person when we are willing to share this. And this is quite a fearful step. But like the ninth step, which we'll discuss later on today, those that involve other people, like 5 and 9, produce a big result. And in the fifth step, in this sharing of secrets that we swore would go to the grave with us, for many of us, this was the beginning of relationship with a higher power. Occurred shortly after or in the process of taking that fifth step. And many speakers in AA that you'll hear talking will relate this, that the one of the big days in their lives occurred while taking the fifth step. And it was that marvelous walk out of the isolation booth, out of that little box that we had built for ourselves, that takes place when we're finally willing to share as completely as possible in the fifth step. And then leading into the step that we're going to talk about today is what I call the sleeper in AA, and that's that sixth step. The beginning of that step talks about this separates the men from the boys. This is the one that separates mediocrity from trying to move a little higher than that. This is the one that suggests that the human condition is that we are willing to settle for as much perfection as will get us by. Why should I try and become a better person? Just for the sake of becoming a better person? I mean, this type of thinking is quite foreign to most of us. And you know, it just doesn't seem to come naturally. And, you know, this is what I think AA is all about. It is trying to unlearn a whole bunch of old ideas. The sixth step talks about the struggle between our instincts and our intellect. It talks about the basic satisfaction of the need for our place in society, for our security, whether it's emotional or financial, and talks about the sexual needs, the needs for companionship that all human beings seem to have. And it talks about trying to develop a willingness to get rid of the list of character defects that we came up with in steps 4 and 5, and how much we desire to hold on to many of these. The more glaring ones, it's fairly easy to develop a willingness to get rid of. But what about the ones that secretly bring us pleasure? What about the ones that we turn to when we try and reward ourselves at the end of the day? You know, you go through some rough times and you say, you know, I deserve something now. I deserve to sit around and do a little fancy thinking. I deserve to sit around and feel superior to the people. I have that great feeling that it really makes me feel good when I sit around and dream about how I'm much better than everybody and I don't need these clowns. And I have a little dream world that I go, and I know it's destructive, and I know I shouldn't be doing it, but it feels good. And I was feeling uncomfortable, and I don't like to feel uncomfortable, so I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to choose to keep doing this. There's a lot of little things like that that make us feel a little bit better that we know we could probably do a lot better without. Maybe a little bit of gossiping, that tremendous pleasure of knowing some little good things, and we know this person doesn't know it, and that marvelous feeling of power that you walk up and say, look at that person sitting there, and they're all calm, and I got this little juicy thing, and I can hardly wait to unload it on them, and that feeling, it's almost like having a drink, of walking over the shop. Do it now? No. I'm going to wait a couple minutes, and this looks like the moment, boom, and I go in there, and look what I just did. There's that great feeling of power that we had right there, and these are very minor, but there seems to be a backlash later on. There's a high feeling we got when we did it, and then there's that, I wish I hadn't done that. I wish I hadn't had that fifth piece of cake. I meant to only have, but it felt so good, and going. And so it's really not a question of making a list of things that are bad for others. This list that comes up is internalized. It's the ones that we do that we wish we hadn't done afterwards. And it's almost as if we had a barometer inside. We had some kind of a internal mechanism that knows the right track for us to be on. And so it's very clear what this list probably should consist of. But the willingness to get rid of it, because these things do make us feel a little bit better, is tough. And this is what the sixth step is all about. Having done the best that we can on that particular step, we come into the heart of the house cleaning, and I think the heart of self-examination, and one of the key parts of the AA program in the seventh step, humbly ask them to remove these shortcomings. Here we're dealing with the word humility. And I would probably spend the next 15 minutes, hopefully, discussing this particular word and this concept, because the book, the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, which I always like to plug on these morning sessions, because it's $3.75, hardly the price of good booze, and all it offers in here is a plan for living that'll last for the rest of your life. And our old plan for living, which was to buy a bottle of vodka, only lasted one day. And then we had to go back and get another one. So you can see what I'm saying is the price is right on this particular product as opposed to Smirnoff, for example. So you might want to get one of these and actually read it. Many of us bought them to put on the bookshelf in case our sponsor came by and said, you got a 12 and 12? Yes. And many of us actually bent it a lot like this so that it looked like it had been read, and underline a few things in there and rip a few pages, and the guy looked in there, that's interesting, you're reading the index. But that is what I think they're talking about when they say go to any length, would be to actually read it. Your own copy at home. And maybe read it more than once, or maybe read it more than once a year. We certainly drank more regularly than that, and if we're trying to replace an old way with a new way, anyway, that's sort of the human condition here. But to get back to humility, the 12 and 12 has a great discussion of this particular concept, and it suggests that this particular word is not on the all-time American hit parade. I don't think America particularly wants to be known throughout the world as a humble country. I don't think that's ever been our particular image, and I don't think alcoholics ever were outstrived to be known as a humble drinker. Do you recall anybody wanting that? We were number one, we were the top in our class. We're hardly related to humility. I thought of humility as humiliation. Every so often I suffered a degree of humiliation, like being called in by the boss in front of all of the other office employees and being chewed out for not showing up, and I used to just go, this is outrageous. Why are they making such a deal out of showing up? I thought that raw intellectual talent was it, and you got paid for the potential that you had in case there was a real emergency, and they were lucky to have a guy on the payroll who might come down here when things got rough. This just showing up is for the average people in the world. I mean, I don't relate to just hunching in. But there was a degree of humiliation that brought me down temporarily to the level of the other people in the office. And then time took care of that, and I soon floated back up into my lofty position, and just felt awful about being dragged down there. And that was there was humility, but it was through the pressures of humiliation. And so whenever I heard this word in the beginning, that I should go out and try and become humble, I connected it with a rather painful process. And as it turned out, I was right. It is a painful process, and the steps certainly suggest that. There's a few lines in the seventh step that I did want to make sure to read. One of them was, let me just touch on this concept. This was another stumbling block in our ability to come to grips with humility. And this had to do with pride, and man's pride in his achievements. And the fact that man, on an individual and a collective basis, has been able to make so many achievements and so many scientific breakthroughs, medical breakthroughs, philosophical breakthroughs, leads one to the following thought, that eventually, probably right around the corner, always just in the next year or two, we're going to make enough breakthroughs to accomplish the following. There will be plenty of food for everybody. There'll be plenty of job for everybody. There'll be plenty of everything for everybody. At which time, all of our instincts can be satisfied. And when that happens, then the world will be happy, and we can turn to culture and character building at that time. And that's now that's sort of applied on a collective basis, and I think you can see entire countries, the whole world sort of operating on that premise, the material premise. In other words, pure materialism. Once we get enough of whatever it is, you just fill in the blank, then everything will be all right, and happiness will be the byproduct of these achievements. And this is also applied on an individual basis. The same philosophy is we get sort of suckered into it. It's a real setup for us alcoholics, and we were really trying to buy that with our drinking. That if I can get enough money in the bank and enough cars in the garage and a big enough house and a big enough job, I will automatically have peace of mind and serenity. And it turns out that some of us, and I'm not one of them, but I've heard some of the people who've made vast quantities of money, and they would go home at night and worry that somebody was going to take it away. I mean, you know, you get it, and it still didn't produce this because there's the fear that it's going to go away. And also that when we get 2 cars, there's a crowd that says 2 is not enough. 4 is the right number if you're going to belong to this club. And there's always this unsatisfied feeling, no matter what it is. So this particular theory was an old idea that had to go. And another one was we had lacked the perspective to see that character building and spiritual values had to come first. I'm personally convinced that this is where the AA slogan, first thing first, comes from. Is we lacked the perspective to see the character building and spiritual values had to come first. That material satisfactions were not the purpose of living. Quite characteristically, we had gone out confusing the ends with the means. Instead of regarding the satisfaction of our material desires as a means by which we could live and function as human beings, we had taken these satisfactions to be the final end and aim in life. And then comes my line out of the Western movies that I like so much. Whenever we had to choose between character and comfort, the character building was lost in the dust of our taste after what we thought was happiness. Seldom did we look at character building as something desirable in itself. This lack of foundation in any permanent value, I think, is the frustration of almost all human beings, especially growing up. And for most of us who come into AA, we're just starting to grow up. We're like the immature 40-year-olds who are wandering around still looking for a set of values to hold on to. We've heard about values. We've heard that if you have these to live by, that you will then get peace of mind and the serenity and so on down, self-respect. And so you look around for values, and you see them on television, you know. Get your underarm smelling good, and then you'll get peace of mind. I mean, you hear these coming from all different directions. You know, that's the wrong kind of clothes to be wearing for peace of mind. You got to wear these. That's the wrong haircut. That's the wrong music you're listening to. That's the wrong book you're reading. You're just given a whole set of values, and none of them are working. And it's very confusing. So you look to the people around us, and it's very difficult to find a set And that's what I think the steps are for. These are principles. These are principles that work, and these are principles that, as alcoholics, we had better turn to. Our greatest asset is the fact that we don't have any choice. That failure to accomplish something along these lines will probably lead to drinking. The other point is, as long as I feel that I can do this to any degree on my own, it's exactly to that degree that I will fail to turn to a higher power. I really think the human dilemma here is that most of us, I know this is my problem anyway, I turn to a higher power when the going gets rough. But most of the time, quite frankly, I can handle it myself. And as a matter of fact, I think deep down I sometimes believe I'm supposed to handle it myself. Those are some of those old ideas that haven't quite extinguished themselves yet. They're like a fire that's almost going out, and then it goes, and it starts booming up again, and then it just goes, yeah, and I get beaten down enough of these meetings, and I finally go, yeah, I understand it. I understand that I'm supposed to keep a higher power first, spiritual principles first, I've got it, and then there's that flickering that comes up again, and I go, I'm not sure about that. I was taught that a real man handles these problems himself, and I'm sorry, and then I'm jumping back in there, and I'm getting all of that kindling wood going again, and I'm charging back in, and it's a week goes by, and I haven't prayed, I haven't picked up a 24-hour day book, and life has gotten bad. I've decided I really don't need these meetings, I really don't need these people, I am getting something done, maybe we get a few accomplishments, these material accomplishments, and we think we're off on that track again, and we've just been a week going off the beam, going off in the opposite direction, and fortunately, we're caught up short with some kind of pain, with some kind of discomfort that leads us back into a reconsideration of these ideas. As long as we place self-reliance first, a genuine reliance upon a higher power was out of the question. The basic ingredient of all humility, a desire to seek and do God's will, was missing. And I really can relate to that. That the moment I fail to place a spiritual value first, as a concept, I'm off on this track of how much I can do myself. Well, maybe I can do half of it. Maybe I can get all of these things that I've been used to doing by myself. I think this effort requires a tremendous amount of practice. I think it requires a lot of mechanical help. I think the little 24-hour day book that so many people talk about in the program is a tremendous exercise in attempting this humility. Certainly, if we don't do it voluntarily, we're liable to get there on an involuntary basis. There's a great transition that takes place in the middle of the little 24-hour day book that so many people talk about in the program. Is a tremendous exercise in attempting this humility. Certainly, if we don't do it voluntarily, we're liable to get there on an involuntary basis. There's a great transition that takes place in the middle of the seventh step when, for the first time, a person may choose to go after humility as something desired rather than something that is necessary. And this may come shortly after our drinking obsession is lifted from us, and we get a glimpse of what some of the rewards of putting spiritual values first are. It may become as a outgrowth of some kind of forced feeding initially, where it's jammed down our throat. You will go to meetings, you will sit here, and it's very painful, we don't want to be doing this. And then we start getting some of the rewards of doing these things, and we may place them in a position that we're going to go after them voluntarily. I think somebody who would get out of bed and come down to a meeting on Saturday morning has made a decision that may not be induced by pain. I think any time that I'm doing something that I feel that I'm voluntarily doing, that I'm trying to incorporate as a part of my life, that I've come more than halfway in the seventh step, that I have no longer see humility as simply a necessity. Another line that I like to read in here is, again, we are driven by the inescapable conclusion which we draw from AA experience that we surely must try with a will or else fall by the wayside. There's been a lot of people come up after the meeting and share with me their definition of wayside. And we have reached a majority decision that it's a bad place to visit, is the wayside. And if anyone has been to a wayside that was enjoyable, see us after the meeting and we'll incorporate it into our statistic gathering that we're doing. I've not met anyone who fell by the wayside and was selling stock in that particular place. The next few pages in this 7th step deal with a 4-letter word that is not too popular in human existence, and there's no way to avoid it, so we'll have to plow through it. And that word is pain. This is a concept that we all learned about pain at a very early age, and our instincts cried out immediately, get rid of it. And as a baby, when I was hungry, I went, scream, and then you got fed, and you said, now I know. Whenever there's pain or discomfort, you scream, and you get it fixed immediately, and that's the way life operates. And I think that's a perfect pattern. Obviously, that's a very immature and a very baby-like approach to life, because you would never get out of the crib. If we really carried it to its extreme, you would simply sit there and scream whenever we were uncomfortable. The more I think about that, I've seen a lot of 40 and 50-year-olds in that same condition, only they're in their couch in front of the TV set, belching and wondering where the beer is, wetting their pants, never even leaving the spot. It's very similar. But must be an inside joke or something. Okay. Anyway, back to pain. Certainly, I think practicing alcoholics, as a practicing alcoholic, I understood what pain was, and I had a very distorted concept about pain. I don't know if anybody else had this particular deal going. When sober, and I experienced pain in the form of anxiety, trembling hands, fear, anger, whatever it was, depression, I immediately thought of a drink as a way of stopping it. I thought that there was probably someone keeping score about how long you endured pain, and that it was against the law and you'd eventually have to pay a fine for sitting there in pain when you could fix it. And that it was my moral duty to fix this pain as soon as it came upon me. And so I would seek out booze, and I would immediately pour it in an attempt to reduce this pain, whatever it was, being afraid, being uptight. However, when I got up in the morning and threw up all morning as a result of all that drinking, I re-explained pain to myself. I said, oh, this kind of pain is a small price to pay for all the fun I get out of drinking. All of the pain that came as a result of my drinking was in a different category, and it was justifiable pain. It fit into the category of you have to pay the fiddler in order to dance. It was that, it made sense. But the pain of growing up, the pain that comes from real life, was totally unacceptable. It was in another category, and it was not faced. It was not endured. It was fixed by drinking. And then we come into AA and we get sober, and now we're faced with a certain amount of pain. We're faced with a lot of things that we haven't done, a lot of growing up that we haven't done. And we find out a very simple thing, that if you buy a 12 and 12, it's painful. That if you buy one and open it and start reading it, it's even more painful. And one way to reduce the pain is to stop reading it, close it, and put it back on the shelf and walk out the door. And we're back. In other words, to take an inventory and to take a close look at oneself and to go back and deal with the past, and the past that most of us have had, is very painful. And there's no doubt about it. It causes ego puncturing, as they label it, is quite painful. And I think there's an illusion that there must be an easier, softer way, and that one is go to meetings and get patted on the head. But it only works for a limited amount of time, and then we start paying the price of not doing the steps. And it's a lower level of pain, but it's over a longer period of time. And it starts adding up to a much bigger pile than the pain we would have had we gone ahead and done it in the first place. It reminds me of the toothache that we know is abscessed, and it's been abscessed for a couple of days, and we decide, should I go to the dentist or not? And we go, no, I don't want to go through all that pain of having the Novocaine needle and the big yank, because that's a tremendous high level of pain. So I choose to put it off for a week. So I now experience a lower level of pain every second of every minute of every day, all week long, and then I go through the big pain. And so whether I went the first day or the second or at the end of a week, the amount of pain that was involved in the second choice by putting it off is much higher than had I gone and done it in the first place. And I really believe this is the case with these character defects, with this coming to grips with what's wrong, with going in and taking a look, and with developing this type of humility to really want to get rid of these things that are wrong with us. And it's quite obvious as I approach each one of these, whether it's overeating, whether it's smoking, whether it's gossiping, whether it's procrastination, financial security, whatever it is, that it's going to be just as painful as it was when I dealt with my drinking. I came in, I had the humiliation of admitting I was an alcoholic, coming into AA, all of those feelings, which eventually led to that freedom, were painful. And they were just so contrary to my image of sitting in these meetings and running down with all these people that I didn't like it. But I liked the results I got when I came out the other side. And it turns out that I made an assumption, once I got through that drinking problem, that I would never have to go through that again. And then I get into these steps and I find out I was wrong, that I'm going to have to go through something similar to that on every one of these things, that I'm really trying to clean house. And I think the analogy of cleaning the house is quite good. You know how it feels when you get through one room? You know, you start out in the room's a total mess, and then you get through and you go, look at this, and it's such a good feeling, it's all clean and everything like that. And then somebody says, yeah, but what about the next room? And you say, I don't want to go in the next room, I want to stay in this room and keep touching up. I like being in this room. And there's a little speck of dust, and you go, hey, look at this room, it's really clean. Hey, but how long can you just stay in that room and claim you've got a clean house? You know, you only let people in that room. Hey, stay in this room. Don't go in that room. You got to go to the bathroom, go home and go to the bathroom. You just stay in my living room. It's a clean house. And we try to pawn one room clean as a clean house. And even ourselves start getting tired of that story after a while. And I think that's what time does in AA. We've cleaned one room, but the rest of it, we haven't even looked in some of those rooms. Some of those little closets, we haven't gone in since we were little kids. And we're afraid to go in there. And we talked about that in the fourth step. We don't know what's in there, but it must be awful or we would have gone there a long time ago. Anybody play those games? I know something's bad in there. Have you ever looked? No. Well, how do you know it's bad? Well, if it wasn't bad, I would have looked. Oh. You ever write that down? It doesn't make any sense at all. But that's why we can stay scared. because it doesn't make any sense. Fear never made any sense. Fear is the absence of sense and the absence of truth. So that's what I think the seventh step is all about, is this coming to grips with this humility, coming to grips with a relationship with a higher power. That's what it's all about, is this, I can't do it. Man never was intended to do it. It was intended always to be done spiritually. And to approach a day spiritually is really what the seventh step is all about. We're going to spend the last few minutes on steps 8 and 9. And here we're dealing now, after dealing with humility, we're going to deal with personal relations. And in essence, the 8th step has really been done when we did the 4th. And if we've taken an inventory in the 4th step, we certainly had to include a few people. If we just inventoried books and desks and cars in our previous years, we've probably left out a few things. And so here in the 8th step, we get to refresh our memories about people in making a list of all the people we'd harmed and become willing to make amends to them all. And it suggests in the 8th step that the first thing that we got to do is to forgive everybody. And that's the doorway into the 8th step, is to just go back and say, now wait a minute, there's a couple of people I'm never going to forgive because I made that decision 20 years ago to never forgive them. And once I make a decision, that's it. That's good. That's nice. That's that good open mind that we need here in AA. Well, I make a decision, boy, there's a guy I'm never going to forgive. He did something that is unforgivable. And you know, there's a couple reasons that this technique is so important. If we're going to go out in the 8th and 9th step asking for forgiveness, trying to settle our wrongdoings with other people, it's going to be very difficult to even get started on it if we find ourselves incapable of forgiving. Because if there's one thing that each one of us is to ourselves, we are the greatest source of knowledge as to what the world is like out there. I mean, if we want to know what another person is like, our best reference point is ourselves. I mean, we know, you know, that's just the way it is to be a human being. You just can't know what it is to be inside of somebody else. And if we are incapable of forgiving someone, what is that going to cause us to think about other people? We're going to assume that they also can't forgive some people. We just draw that conclusion whenever we set ourselves up that way. And then it gets kind of nervous to go about doing that 9th step, because that means we're going to run into people who are going to tell us to shove off. And so we don't get it done. And fear prevents us from going out there. And then we go back, and so our world that we're going to go out and see exists only from our frame of reference. And so if I can go back and start all over again and say, oh, I really can forgive those people, and then do it, and then feel that feeling of having finally let that garbage out, now when I get ready to go out and do the 9th step, it isn't so tough, because the world is composed of people who can forgive. And it's only because I forgave that the whole world changed. And when I turn into a person who is kind and able to think about other people once in a while, my whole world turns into that. And that's really what we're talking about when we say the AA program or life or spiritual change is an inside job. Just like alcohol made us change inside and feel comfortable and the whole world changed, so the whole world changed when we change inside here. The second thing on making a list of all the people is to make a list. This sounds very simple. It almost sounds as simple as not drinking in order to stay sober. But you'd be surprised how long it is before a pencil appears in the 8th step. It gets discussed, it gets analyzed, it gets whatever you want to call it, but no pencil appears, and no names get written down, and no types of harm. And what is harm that can be done? I've been to many closed meetings where the 8th step is discussed and say, my drinking never hurt anybody. I lived alone and I did this. Or people say, around my family, I never spoke to anyone, so I didn't harm them. Matter of fact, a lot of times I never came home. So, they were free of me and I wasn't there harming anybody. Down at the office, I didn't speak to a soul. I just went in, I did my job, and I didn't harm anybody, so I don't have to do this. I'm the kind of guy who was alone all the time and didn't do any harm. And the step suggests that this is a common evasive tactic used by alcoholics. Don't want to experience any pain, and I relate to that. Don't want to have to do this step. The person who indulges in such things as self-pity, sitting in the middle of a crowd feeling sorry for him or herself, probably does more harm than the person who comes in and breaks all the windows in the room. Because you can't deal with someone who is just sitting there sulking and feeling sorry for themselves and not saying anything to anybody. You're awkward, you're walking around, you don't know whether to touch them or to talk to them. It sort of ruins the wet blanket on the party of life. It's amazing the harm that can be done to other human beings. You can ruin your whole office by that kind of scorn, sulking, no humor, just that sitting there like a lump on a log. That harm is much higher than the person who's in there going, you dummy. It's much more subtle, it's much more pervasive, and much more difficult to deal with. And so we really have to examine what harm can be done. And what am I trying to do? I'm trying to show my anger at the world. I'm trying to show my dissatisfaction. I want everybody to see how I feel about them, even though I never say a word. And if this is our approach through life, we've indeed cut a wide swath of destruction as we meander through and occasionally throwing up on a few people when we're not being sulking. And we got a lot to look back on. We got a lot to understand what we've done that has caused the world to be such a rotten place for us to live in. And that truly is the reason for the 8th step. While it's very important that we end up making these amends, it's also equally important that we learn everything we can about ourselves and why we're so uncomfortable and why we have a problem getting along with other people. And we find out in this particular step, as we start making this list and the harm that we've done, that the people are generally going to fit into two categories. Either we insist on dominating them, controlling every little movement, of our children or our husband or our wife. Now do this, do that, and we have to be in charge, or forget it, or we won't play. I don't know if you get it. Give me back the glove and the bat. I'm going home. I'm in charge here. Or we insist on them taking care of us. And we want to just be totally dependent on the people around us. And, of course, they let us down all the time. They can't live up to our expectations, and so we hold them accountable. And this comes out in that marvelous list that eventually gets done in the 8th step. Having made a complete list and leaving no one off, and there's no reason to delay on the 8th step because there's no people involved. You don't see anybody. There's no other person involved. It's just a pencil and a piece of paper and the 12 and 12 trying to get a little insight to what this step is all about. So that could be done right away. Now, there may be some reason for waiting a while on the 9th step. Now, let me just wrap up with the 9th step here. This is one of the most interesting steps at AA meetings that I've been to in the years I've been in. This is a step where it is never discussed. The only things discussed in this step are the exceptions to it. Boy, I've heard them discussed hour after hour, which people should not be approached. Let's not discuss how you approach the vast majority. Let's discuss what's the exception to the 9th step. Pretty soon you find out the whole 9th step's an exception. We might as well skip it. And it produces some of the greatest rewards in the AA program, so it's worth going back and let's take a look what we're trying to get done here. If you look at the 12 and 12, it talks about, yes, there should be a little waiting and not rushing in to the 9th step. So we should try and make sure we're on the beam in AA. that we've built up some sobriety, that we're not just doing this during our first day and running around trying to get everything done, that it's reasonable to expect that we're going to keep going to meetings, and then we sort of got a handle on AA. Now we're ready to go out and try and accomplish some of the efforts of this step. And the book says we may want to wait several weeks. I think it's been translated over the years into several years, but the book says several weeks before we approach some of the people at the office and our family and so on now. And we got to remember that what we're doing here is when we go and we're going to talk about a very tough relationship, we're going to talk about these things where there's been a lot of conflict back and forth, that we are there to clean our side of the street. We're not there to point out very carefully where both of us have been wrong. That's not the point of this whole thing. We're there simply to point out where we think we may have been wrong, and we're there for one specific reason, because it's the right thing to do. See, that's the reason that we're there. We picked that up in the third step. We picked that up in the seventh step. We're simply here because it has been pointed out that this is the correct thing to be done in this situation. And our new plan for life that we're slowly developing through these steps is that whenever we come to know what the right thing is to do, we're going to try and do it. That's this new plan that we're coming up with. The reason we're going to do the right thing is we're trying to become spiritual, and we understand that that's what a spiritual person does. They do the right thing because it's the right thing. That's it. There's no motive beyond that. It's a whole new ball game. Nobody ever had approached it in that fashion. And so we're not interested in the kind of reception we get. If we get thrown out of the office, fine. We still did the right thing. If we get, like we do in most cases, a very good reception, the person ends up a mutual handshake and on an area of conflict is cleared up that should have been cleared up a long time ago, fine. That's good too. And it's also good because we did the right thing. There will be some examples, and they'll be discussed at meetings ad infinitum as to which ones should not be done right now. Should we discuss the money we took from the office and then we get fired and then our family starves to death? Should we discuss our girlfriend or our boyfriend and it upsets our family? Discretion in some of these situations is absolutely necessary, so we discuss it with our sponsor, we discuss it with other advisors, but we discuss it with one thought in mind, that when we know the right thing to do, we will then do it. Not with the idea that we'll avoid it forever. That when the right answer appears, we will be willing to do that particular action. And when that is done, and this particular step is done, the big book then, in my opinion, takes over with some marvelous reading, and we'll close the meeting with that. And I'm going to lead up to these promises, because this is where the promises of AA are contained. They're in doing the ninth step. But prior to doing that, I've got a couple sentences I'll read. Sometimes we hear an alcoholic say the only thing he needs to do is keep sober. Certainly he must keep sober, for there will be no home if he doesn't. But he's a long way from making good to the wife or parents who for years he has so shockingly treated. The alcoholic's like a tornado roaring his way through the lives of others. God, what a word, a tornado. Hearts are broken, sweet relationships are dead, affections have been uprooted. Look at those, uprooted. Selfish and inconsiderate habits have kept the home in turmoil. We feel a man is unthinking when he says that sobriety is enough. He's like the farmer who came up out of the cyclone cellar to find his home ruined. To his wife he remarked, "I don't see anything the matter here, Ma. Ain't it grand the wind stopped blowing?" And that would be sort of purposeful forgetting, to suddenly sober up and say, well, isn't it nice that everything's all right and the whole world is in shambles around us, but we're comfortable because we're sober. There's some work to be done, and it suggests the spiritual life is not a theory, we have to live it. As we make these amends, we should be sensible, tactful, considerate, and humble without being servile or scraping. As God's people, we stand on our own feet. We don't crawl before anyone. If we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. We are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. And these are the promises. We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them. Let's take a break and we'll come back and get everybody to participate. Thank you.